Um, Thanks everyone for coming to our January book club series. Um, I do have everyone on mute right now, but please feel free to unmute yourself, put a hand up, ask questions as we go. Don't feel like you need to wait until the end. There will be We will ask more questions at the end, but go ahead and you can ask questions as we go. Like I said, I will be recording and we'll put this on our YouTube site. So feel free to let me know if you'd like a link to this evening's chat, and I can send that right over. I am very honored to get to introduce Roaring Fork Club member Bob Chapman and his very inspiring book. Can you see that? Everybody Matters right here. Just so we can get a kind of a sense, who has had a chance to read um, Bob's book so far? Awesome. And then I know I have attended our community listens, and so has Dick. Anyone else had the opportunity to attend any of? Oh, and Scott, there you are. Yep, I see you. Yep. So that gives a little sense to some background for us. I'll do a little background on Mr. Chapman here. He became the CEO of Barry Waymiller, which is currently a $3 billion global capital equipment business. But back in 1975, at age 30, when he took over the struggling 80-year-old business, they were at a $20 million revenue business. Mr. Chapman has applied a unique blend of both strategy and culture in transforming Barry Waymiller into a vibrant global organization with 12,000 members today. So, my first question, from the challenges that you experienced in your business career in transforming Barry Waymiller, what key learnings stand out that you can share with our audience this evening?
I think for your audience, a tiny bit of background. My background was I got an accounting degree from Indiana. And if you asked me why I became an accountant, I'd say I have no idea. Uh, the greatest compliment somebody ever gave me is, I can't believe you're an accountant. But I did get an accounting degree and went on to get an MBA at Michigan, and then went to Price Waterhouse. So, I mean, one of the things I don't have a psychology background, anthropology background. I'm a classic business manager career background with a decent education, and I was not exceptional. One of the things I hope you get out of this is, in my career, I would say to you, it's not my intellect that allowed me to do well. It is my common sense and creativity. That to me, as I've given these talks around the world, and I look back on it, I was just blessed with the ability to see value where other people are not. So the first half of my career was a very traditional career. My dad died when I was 30. The company was 18 million. It was financially fragile. I had joined it from Price Waterhouse at my dad's invitation. And my first part of my career was to try and make something of my dad's hard work for the 20 years he had owned this company, and tried to transform it, but was unable to. He worked hard at it, and he had had 2 heart attacks and was physically pretty tired. And so basically, again, my first half of my career, and the beauty of my career was because my dad died when I was 30, and I had just 6 years in the company, so I had a good awareness. I was ready for the challenge, but I also made a lot of basic mistakes. I grew too fast. I tried too many things. And in 1983, my banks pulled on me. And what I tell students when I teach is, my greatest lessons came from my biggest mistakes. I didn't, there's an old expression, you only grow one way when you eat ice cream. Because I made my mistakes early, and because I'm an eternal optimist. I mean, it was so bad in 1983 that they repossessed our coffee maker because we hadn't paid the coffee service company in 6 months. We lived day to day. So from 1983 to 1987, I we were in financial turmoil, and it was a day-to-day, month-to-month transition. But I never lost hope, and I never gave up. And the key is that I went from trying to take this old business that made brewery equipment, and I realized in 1983 that our history did not give us a future. So I worked to try and transform the company through acquisitions. My only problem is I had no money. The turning point from my traditional management standpoint was in 1983. I went to our finance team and I said, look, you guys, I'm proud of our history, but making equipment for the brewing industry does not give us a future for a variety of reasons. And we need to do acquisitions, because I'd studied a company called Emerson Electric. My finance team looked at me and said, great idea, Bob. We only have one problem. And I said, what's that? And they said, we have no money, Bob. I'm just going to repeat this. Do you understand? We have no money. And my response, which is kind of embodies my personality, was, I didn't tell you I needed money. I told you we needed to do acquisitions. And I left that room unencumbered by the fact that I was broke. And I began doing acquisitions. So what do you buy when you have no money? You buy things nobody else wants, and they'll almost pay you to buy them. Okay. So that's what started transforming our company. So I found out I was pretty good, because I was pretty intense, because again, we were on the edge of survival. And so I started turning these companies around in 1987. We did a spectacular transformation. We spun off 2/3 of the company, the acquisitions, under the London Stock Exchange, and Harvard wrote a case study because they couldn't believe we bought these broken little companies, put them together, and had a massively successful offering on the London Stock Exchange. So the company today, the $3 billion company again, is kind of was transformed in 1987. We spun off the acquisitions, and I was left with that historic business that was sick. But now I had the experiences of dramatic growth, dramatic decline, miraculous recovery. So one of the things I'd want you to know is that I designed a business model from my experiences from the late 70s and 80s. There's an old expression, you need to get the right people on the bus. That's not really quite right. You need to build a safe bus, which is your business model. And you need drivers who know where they're going and how to get there. And then anybody who gets on the bus is going to be fine. So I was fortunate to have made some pretty serious mistakes in the 70s and 80s, survived it, never lost hope, had the miraculous recovery. And now in 1988, I had money, but I still had the old business. And it was about a $20 million business. So 115 acquisitions later today, we sit here today, and it's a $3 billion company. So my first half of my career was very traditional, but I had three transformative events occur to me in the late 1990s and early 2000 that changed me from what I call traditional management to what I call truly human leadership, which is caring for people. And the three events that I think are significant. The first event occurred in 1997 when I bought this company in South Carolina. And I flew down there, and the experience I experienced when I went down there was I said to myself, why can't business be fun? Why do we call it work? And I created these games aligned to value creation. I saw a transformation in the business performance when people started having fun. The second one occurred in St. Louis at our church when my mentor of the church was our rector, and I was very inspired by Ed Salmon. But one day I looked at Cynthia and said, Cynthia, the church has only got us for 1 hour a week. We have people for 40 hours a week. We are 40 times more powerful than the church to help people live lives of meaning and purpose. And I walked out of that church that day saying business could be the most powerful force for good in the world if we simply cared about the people we had the privilege of leading. And the third occurred in Aspen at the Roaring Fork Club, a wedding. And Cynthia and I were sitting there in the tent up by the pool at a wedding of a good friend. And as he was walking his daughter down the aisle, everybody oohed and ahhed how precious this young lady was, and how cute this young man was at the altar, and how proud the father was walking his daughter down the aisle. As he got up to the altar, he took the hand of his daughter and said, her mother and I give our daughter to be wed to this young man. And he sat down next to his wife and hugged each other. And my mind again went to a different place. I said, that's not what that father wanted to say. That's what he was told to say at the rehearsal dinner. What he wanted to say is, look at young man. Her mother and I brought this precious young lady into this world. We've given her all the love and care we could give her so she could be who she's intended to be. And we expect you, young man, through this marriage, for you to allow her to continue to be who she's intended to be through your powerful relationship. Do you understand that, young man? That is what every father wants to say as he gives away his precious daughter. And then my mind went to the most powerful transformation. I said, oh my God, all 12,000 people that work for us around the world are somebody's precious daughter or son who's been placed in our care. Now that's that last story, the way that built from why can't business be fun to business could be a source for good to everybody's somebody's precious child. As I've given dozens and dozens of these talks around the world, that wedding story at the Roaring Fork Club is the one everybody remembers. Because when you stop looking at people as a cab driver, a waiter at the Roaring Fork Club, a pro at the golf shop, and you look at them as somebody's precious child, you treat them dramatically different than you would when you see them as a function. So that's what transformed me from management to leadership. And then accidentally, we let people heard about this, started coming in, and our story started spreading around the world through people like Simon Son. So that's kind of how we this from traditional management, and I define the word management means the manipulation of others for your success, to leadership, which is the stewardship of the lives entrusted to you. I'll tell you a really neat story. I was interviewed by Washington University organizational development professors, and after an hour and a half, they said, "You're the first CEO we've ever talked to that never talked about their product." I said, "We've been talking about a product for the last hour and a half. It's our people. I won't go to my grave proud of the machinery we build. I will go to my grave proud of the people that built that machinery." And that startled them because we tend to think of our company as defined by our product, not our people. So I hope that kind of gives you a feeling for how this, I went from what I call management, which is what I was taught, to leadership, which is about caring for people. Amy, that's a long answer to your first question.
Well, no, that's a wonderful answer. And it's a great segue um, into, I think, what set your company apart when the 2008, 2009 Great Recession happened. Most other businesses were laying off huge numbers of their team members, and you did not. So share with us what drove your unique approach to survive and thrive through the global financial challenge.
Well, a piece of that answer is in there. About 15 years ago, we had tried some of these games to have people have fun, and we saw some traumatic change of behavior, and we started trying other little ideas. We started seeing dramatic changes in joy, fun, performance, and we gathered together in actually Clearwater, Florida, and said something bigger is going on here. And so we started writing down on the board what were we experiencing? Why were all of a sudden these games and fun creating value? And we stood back from the board eventually and we said, those are leadership principles. And we called them our guiding principles of leadership. And as we published this constitution of our leadership principles, it was about the time of the Enron scandal, which we're all aware of, that led to the demise of Arthur Andersen. And a lady that works for me, our human resource director, looked at me and said, "Bob, Enron had great values on the wall. They just didn't live them." And I took that as a challenge. I looked at it and said, we're not going to put them in the wall. We're going to in people's heads and hearts. So I started traveling around the world saying, these are values we believe in. Talk to me about them and tell me how we're living them. And we started changing. And so I really got into this prophesizing on these guiding principles. So when 08, 09 hit, all of a sudden caught us completely off guard. Our orders dropped slightly, but we had a pretty good backlog. And so in January of 09, I flew down to Naples, Florida for our board meeting. I walked in the boardroom. We have an outstanding group of directors. My directors looked at me and said, "Bob, don't you think you need to lay off people?" I said, "Why do you say that?" And he said, "Well, because everybody is. I mean, don't we have to?" And I said, "I don't think so. I think we got a pretty good backlog of orders, and I think we'll get through it." So we got through the meeting. Everybody's fine. About a month later, I'm in Italy, Lucca, Italy, at our operation in Italy, and I got an email from the States and said, a major consumer products company just put on hold a $20 million order in our largest operation. Just put on stop. We already had the order, down payment. We're already working on it. And so it's one thing not to get additional orders. Then all of a sudden, when your backlog disappears, you think, oh my God, it's, and I remember sitting in my room in Italy and saying, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I remember all the preaching I'd been doing about caring about people. And I said to myself, if we let people go, we're going to hurt people. And it caused me to think differently. And I sat in my hotel room and I thought, well, what would a caring family do if a family had a crisis? We'd all pitch in and take a little pain so nobody would have to take a lot of pain. And so I emailed back to the States from my hotel room in Italy and I said, what if we asked everybody to take a month off without pay? And we could get through this, whatever this is going to look like, because again, we didn't know. Downturn, I said, by the time I land, tell me how we can do that thoughtfully and properly. So by the time I landed, our team had thought about it. We announced that everybody was going to take a month off whenever they wanted to, okay? Because we wanted them to have quality time with their family. So in exchange for them taking a month off, I wanted to give them time. And I was astounded at the reaction because I would have done what everybody else did. You lay off people when your orders go down. It's not personal. It's just you don't have the work, you lay off people. People's reaction was unbelievable because what they felt was even though they were going to give up 1 month's pay, they sat and looked at the person on the right and the left and thought, I'm helping them save their job. And it was an act of compassion on their part to take a little hit, well, 1/12 their salary. And our morale went up when we announced it. We'd never done it, never heard of it, never thought of it. And and so everybody took a month off at some time. We got through that without letting anybody go. And when the economy started to come up, our business started rising quickly because we hadn't lost our people. We validated our culture. So that story has been told. I mean, Simon Sinek talks about that story all over the world because we're taught you downsize, you right size people. Okay. And there's an expression that Simon Sinek has that you'll love. Dick will like this. In the military, we honor those who give of themselves in service of others. And in business, we give people bonuses who sacrifice others in service of themselves. Why can't business, like the military, see its primary responsibility as the men and women in their care? And my position is they can, okay? And we got through that event and we did more to validate our culture than anything we could do because who you are in your worst of time is more a statement than anything else. So that's how we got through the 08, 09. And Simon Sinek talks about it all over the world. He wrote about it because he's never seen a company do that. Again, we had people volunteer to take somebody's time that they couldn't afford. They had a young family. They couldn't really afford to lose 1/12. So a senior person would go and say, I'll take one of your weeks so you only have to take 3 weeks off. And that maybe that'll be easier. And then somebody else, people did volunteer work at their church. It was astounding, but it was stimulated by our guiding principles of leadership, which said we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people. And we touch our customers, we touch our team members, we touch our investors, we touch our bankers, we touch our suppliers, and we need to think about our actions. And that guided us to a totally unique approach that, again, that's always somebody always asks me about that because we're kind of taught you got to downsize, right size when economic conditions challenge you. And that's why virtually every company in the country, and the problem is you never think about the fact that when you let Joe go, who sits at this desk, Mary on one side and Fred on the other side, see Joe get let go. Joe's got 2 young kids. They know he'll be hurt. And the collateral damage, much less to Joe, but to the people who don't get laid off is horrible. We teach people, you got to do that. You got to keep your company solid. People got to go, they got to go. You got to keep the company solid. And we got through that without doing it. And COVID, we sell capital equipment and we've let nobody go in COVID. And our company is extremely strong in COVID because part of it is our business model. Part of it is our business model is so robust that we are performing well. So that's the 08, 09 downturn where we took a totally different approach, stimulated by our guiding principle of leadership, which said we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people.
I love that story. It feels so hopeful. But one of the facts in your book that is not so hopeful is that when asked, 7 out of 8 people feel like their company doesn't care about them. But your message of sending those in our span of care home each day, knowing that who they are and what they do matters, is again very is unusual in the business world. So, how can you, as a business and leaders, be taking care of their people, but also taking care of their shareholders?
Well, thanks for reminding me of that, Amy. I'm gonna. My granddaughter graduated from Aspen High School 4 years ago, and when I was sitting in the Aspen music tent for that graduation, everybody was cheering as their child, their grandchild, their neighbor, or daughter, son walked up to get the diploma on the stage of the music tent. And yay, all this excitement in the tent. And as my granddaughter walked up, Aiden, to get her diploma, I started crying because I knew the world we were sending her into. Before the pandemic, when we had peace and prosperity in this country, we had the highest level of peace in the history of the country, and we had the lowest unemployment in 50 years. So people had jobs, they could change jobs and improve their income, they're taking vacation, and we had the highest level of anxiety and depression we have ever had. Why? Because people don't feel cared for, they feel used for somebody else's gain. And so here's the statistics that are absolutely accurate. As Amy said, 88% of all people in this country, 88% say they feel they work for a company that does not care about them. 88%. Why would you want your daughter, your grandson, your in-laws to get a job when you know there's an 88% chance they're going to go home each night feeling not appreciated? Okay. 3 out of 4 people in this country are disengaged in what they're doing. The Mayo Clinic told us the person you report to at work is more important to your health than your family doctor. Okay. 80, and I was never taught this, never heard this, never occurred to me that the way I would run my business would affect the way our team members would go home and treat their spouse, treat their kids, and behave in our country. So when you see the anger and that came out in racial unrest in the last year, what you're seeing is that anxiety and depression that was in our society with full employment and a strong economy. Okay. But people didn't feel good because when they had money and we had peace, because they feel used. 65% of all people, according to Gallup, would give up a salary increase if they could fire their boss. Okay. There's a 20% increase in heart attacks on Monday mornings when people go back to work. Okay. And 55% of all people would trust a stranger before they would trust their boss. When CEOs complain to me about the cost of healthcare, I say, guys, you are the problem. 74% of all illnesses are chronic. The biggest cause of chronic illness is stress, and the biggest cause of stress is work. We are self-destructing in this country. There's nothing our government can do. I don't care who you favor for president or Congress or Senate. They will have no impact on this issue until business leaders, like the CEO Roundtable did recently, say our people are our responsibility. We need to send them home feeling valued and fulfilled. Because remember, 3 out of 4 people are disengaged in what they're doing today. 3 out of 4 teachers are disengaged in what they're doing today. Because we have hospital administrators, we have school administrators, we don't have leaders. So the issue in our country that troubles me deeply is we're self-destructing for economic gain. I'll tell you one last story that really brings it home. There's a gentleman, a very successful gentleman, who heard me give a speech, and he flew out to Aspen to have dinner with me at the Maroon Creek Club. We're sitting there, and I said, "What are you really proud of in your life?" And he said, "Well, I'm known for my $140 million gift to my alma mater. But what I'm really proud of is my minority student athletic scholarship program." I said, "Wonderful. How many people are you able to help a year with your minority students program?" He said, 5 or 6. And I said, "That's wonderful." how many people work for your company around the world today? He said about 100,000. I said, so you're telling me you really care about these 5 or 6 minority students you can help with a scholarship, and you don't care about the 100,000 people whose life you have in your hand for 40 hours a week? And this incredibly fine gentleman looked at me and he said, I never thought about that. We have a society where we celebrate people who write checks to charity. Okay. What a wonderful family. They just wrote a check to the Cancer Society or one of the other great institutes. The greatest act of charity in our country is not the checks we write. It is the way we treat people that we have the privilege of leading and interacting with, and treating them like we would want our son or daughter treated if it was them that we are treating. That is what we desperately need, because we have a society that is basically doesn't know how to care for each other, and we don't feel good regardless of our pay, regardless of the home, regardless of the club. And the behavior we're seeing in our society and where we are sending our kids is a broken world where we use people for our gain. Okay. And we don't need them, we lay them off. Okay. It's not our fault. Downturn in the economy, et cetera. Does that make sense to everybody? That is the issue we face in this country. Until we learn to care for each other, which is through the skills of listening. The greatest act of caring is not talking to somebody, it is listening to somebody. So you can see why I had tears in my eyes when my granddaughter graduated, because I knew the world we were sending them into, a world where they were going to be used and manipulated and discarded when they weren't needed anymore. And they weren't going to be able to go to a place where they feel valued, because Gallup says the number one source of happiness in the world is a good job doing meaningful work with people you enjoy. What do we deny to 88% of all people in this country? The opportunity to go home each night feeling that they matter. And the interesting thing is, I'm not giving you a theory, I'm giving you a fact. This is the way we run our company. And I came through those 3 transformations. It wasn't a book I read, it wasn't a consultant. We didn't think we had a problem. It was just these transformative events that awakened me to the power and the skill of caring. And it starts with, as Amy said, listening, recognizing and celebrating the goodness of others. I mean, all of you for a second, just given the media right now. Do you realize how the media is just dividing us every day? It's taking the extremes of both sides and amplifying them. I have never felt more hostility in the media than I felt today. And they just continue to drive a wedge between and and whatever station you listen to is what you believe are the facts. And you go to the other station, it's completely opposite. So I just really worry that we are self-destructing because we define success as money, power, and position. Okay. And true success is living true values and making an impact on other people's lives. And we don't teach that. We don't live that. And we wonder what's wrong with our country. And believe me, regardless who you voted for, they're not going to change that. They have, Congress is just as broken. I spoke I was invited to speak to the 200, about 4 years ago, right before Trump was in. So if Obama was still president, I was invited to speak to 200 members of Congress, Republican Party, and I flew up to Washington. And I was sitting at the table about ready to give my keynote speech to these 200 representatives. And the lady organizing the event turned to me and she said, "What are we going to do about the lack of trust?" I said, "You mean in Washington?" She said, "No, I mean in this room. Nobody trusts anybody." And I see this all over our society today. And it worries me that I don't. And so we are out trying to show that you can care for people and create value. Okay, which is our companies for the last 30 years, our share price has gone up compounded 15% a year for 30 years. And we're very proud the Walton family is our largest shareholder. So we know you can create human value and economic value and harmony. They're not in disharmony, but we don't teach it. So we're out helping companies learn to care. But unfortunately, our education system is teaching us how to use people for our success, which we define as money, power, and position. A few years ago, the Aspen Institute had a guest in New York Times writer, and he was speaking to the wonderful people who write the meaningful checks to the Aspen Institute, which we're all proud of in Aspen. And he said, thank you all for the meaningful contribution to the Aspen Institute. Our work is really dependent upon your support, and we appreciate it. But just let me ask you a question. How did you get your money? And they didn't like that at all, because we have a society that says it doesn't matter how you get it, as long as it's legal, okay? And as long as you give it away, you'll be recognized. And the greatest act of charity is the way we treat people, not the checks we write. And if we could ever get that into our education system and teach people how to care, how to listen to each other, you and I, each one of us, could profoundly change the world. And these kids that are children and others are bringing, I've got 20 grandkids, and I am worried that in my lifetime, I've just seen this country become more and more divisive, and not know how to listen, and not know how to care for each other.
Now, you mentioned education and kids and grandkids, and that touches all of our hearts. But how else do you plan on spreading your important message, both within your company and beyond? Because you know this is a really an important message for us to spread.
Well, when I realized, actually about 15 years ago, that I had been blessed with a model that I thought some higher power had given us that could change the world, where people would feel cared for and valued, I felt a huge sense of responsibility that it lived beyond my time. And so we started to a internal university to teach people how to care for each other, not use each other, how to care for each other. Okay. Cynthia and I raised 6 kids. We have 20 grandkids. And so we've done a lot to educate ourselves in raising kids. And our leadership model really reflects that. But I said, how am I going to make sure this lives beyond my time? And so we ended up deciding to start a university to teach people how to care. Okay. Not just tell them to care, like our church tells us we need to care for each other, but it doesn't tell us how to care for each other. And so we created a university to convert managers into leaders. And as Amy said, one of our team members said, well, if we're going to teach people to be leaders, we need to teach them to listen. I said, why do we need to teach adults to listen? We know how to listen. Okay. It never occurred to me that we would teach. And my team said, we have to, Bob. And I said, okay, but I don't understand why we're going to teach adults to listen. So about 2 months later, I was up in Minneapolis, and a young lady running our personnel department, our Minneapolis operation, came up to me and said, Mr. Chapman, I just took your listening class at Barry Windmill University. I said, really, what was it like? I had no idea. She said, it changed my life. And I said, we taught a class at work that changed your life? She said, yes, and I now know how to raise my 2-year-old daughter. Now that touched me deeply, and I started traveling around the country listening to people who took our leadership classes. 95% of the feedback from my travels was not about how they ran a better accounting department or they ran a better engineering department. It was about how their marriage improved, how their relationship with their mother improved, how their relationship with their children improved. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, how could we teach leaders, managers to become leaders, and people tell us how they became better fathers, wives, kids, parents, community members? And what I learned was, we've been doing this now for 15 years. We're now working with Harvard, and Stanford and McKinsey. McKinsey have said, and I'll tell you, so first of all, we started teaching this, and a lady in Green Bay, Wisconsin, emailed me now about 11 years ago. And she said, Mr. Chapman, have you ever heard of Simon Sinek? I said, no. He said, well, he does a TED talk on finding your why. You ought to listen to it. So I said, okay. So I looked at it. I watched about half. And I said, well, he's interesting. Why don't you drop him a note? And so if he ever wants to chat, I'd be glad to. I didn't think much of it. Well, apparently our team wrote him a good note. And I live in St. Louis, and he lives in New York, and we decided to have lunch in LA, the most expensive lunch I've ever had. So I flew to LA for lunch with this guy I knew nothing about. And he sits down and he says, now, Bob, I only have an hour. And I said, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I didn't really care. within 15 minutes, he said, Bob, I could cancel all my appointments and we could meet all afternoon. And I said, no, Simon, I got to get back to Aspen for dinner. And he calls it the famous 1 hour lunch that lasted 3 hours. He came back and he recorded a video. So he said, I want to see this. I don't believe it. So he came and spent 2 days in our company talking to our people in our two largest operations in Wisconsin. And he stood up before our group and we did a video of it. He said, I'm no longer a nutty idealist. I'm just seeing what I dreamed of. I dream of the ability to walk down any street in our country, tap anybody on the shoulder and say, do you like your job? And they'd say, no, I don't like my job. I love my job. That's what he dreams of. And he said, if it exists, it must be possible. I'm no longer a nutty idealist because I've seen what I dreamed of. He then brought Bill Urey in from Harvard, who is a world peace negotiator. Bill is a legendary world peace negotiator. Bill came in because Simon said, you got to see this. Bill Urey spent the same 2 days Simon did. And Bill Urey said, I just saw the answer to world peace. And I said, how could you go to a manufacturing operation in Wisconsin and see the answer to world peace? And he said, Bob, I saw a place where people genuinely care for each other. So then Simon brings in Amy Cuddy, the #3 TED Talk in the world. She's a Harvard professor. Amy sits down with Simon after her walkthrough and she said, I have never hugged so many people and cried so much walking through your plants because everybody wanted to tell me their story about how it feels to be cared for. This is as close to utopia as I've ever seen. So we started getting this feed and then multiple others. So Simon opened the door and people from around the McKinsey partners, Harvard sent in 7 professors to visit because they're thinking about how they teach leadership. So I honestly believe that what we were blessed with is again, I gave you my background. There's no way with my accounting degree and my experience at Pricewaterhouse, I thought of a leadership model that would blow Harvard and McKinsey away. Okay. There's no way. There's no way I would be teaching 50 Harvard divinity students last Friday, about how faith and leadership can align and you can care for people. So there's no question that what I write in my book, and what happened is this one gentleman who was a Srikumar Rao, he was a contributing editor to Forbes. He came in and he did the same thing Simon and Bill Urey did. And he sat here right across from my desk in St. Louis and he said, Bob, I've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of CEOs. I've never seen anything like this. You have got to write a book and share it with the world. So we looked for a co-author. And he recommended Raj Sisodia, who wrote the book Unconscious Capitalism with John Mackey on Whole Foods. Raj said, look, I really don't have time. And I said, that's fine, I understand. But if you ever want to stop by. So he ended up 4 months later flying into our plant. And he ended up, after the same visit Simon had and Bill, he said, Bob, this is a book that has to be written and I'm going to write it. Okay. And so Simon was my co-author, and the name of the book is obviously Everybody Matters, okay? Not some people matter, not the chief executive matters, not the politicians matter. Everybody matters, okay? And so that is why we wrote the book. Simon Sinek said, you got to do a TED Talk. Your message will go around the world. Over 200,000 people have watched my TED Talk. My book is really sold and printed in 4 different languages around the world. I did right before COVID, I did 15 speeches in Europe in 5 days, and every venue was oversold. This is a message that is not an American message. It's not a North American message. It's a global message. People simply want to know they matter, and leaders have the chance, like parents, to show them they matter. Does that make sense to all of you? So I believe I told you my back. There's no way I thought of the things I'm sharing with you. Somebody's simply using me to show the world the way we are intended to live and work together, where we genuinely care for each other. Isn't that the world you want to bring kids into? Isn't that the world you want us to move to? So, and again, politicians aren't going to get us there. So no point in spending any time listening to politicians, but we can do that. The Roaring Fork Club can do it. We can do it. And what we started when we learned the power of listening. Cynthia and I said, we've got to take this outside our company. This is too powerful. So we created a nonprofit that we started going around the country, teaching people how to listen to each other. And if you all would sit in on any graduating class and hear the stories when people learn to listen, it is the most healing power in the world. Okay, because when people if you want to, I always thought when you cared for somebody, you went over and talked to them. It turns out when you care for somebody, you go over to listen to them with empathy. You don't judge. You simply allow them to talk and you ask thoughtful questions to validate how they feel, not try and shape how they feel. And so we now teach that. The biggest base is the United States Air Force. We teach it at various Air Force bases around the country because that's where my TED Talk was, and the four-star general got interested in it. But we teach it all over the country. We also decided that we needed to share this leadership model. And so we started a company called Chapman and Co. Leadership Institute. And we got two companies, American Airlines, San Francisco 49ers, the St. Louis Blues, a Shell Oil Company, McKinsey. We have 20 people who work with major corporations around the country, helping them learn to care for the people they have the privilege of leading. So we have our internal university where we try to live these values, teach people who don't have the background in caring how to care through empathetic listening, recognition and celebration, and culture of service. And then we have our community listens where we go out and teach in communities people how to listen to the people they care about in their life at work and at home. And then we have the Leadership Institute. But here's what I've come to. We're out treating the cancer of not being cared for. So we're treating cancer through our Leadership Institute and our nonprofit, but we're not curing cancer. The cure for cancer is education. And remember, I was in, there's a school in Charlotte, North Carolina called Charlotte Latin, a prominent private school in Charlotte, North Carolina, where somehow they heard about our leadership model and didn't even know that my daughter and grandkids go to that school. And so my daughter was at their school meeting one time with the headmaster and some of the teachers, and they were talking about this new initiative to teach leadership in high school. And they're talking and they say, well, we've learned about this international guru on leadership and we're going to follow his model. And my daughter's listening, and my daughter finally said, who is this international guru you're talking about? And the headmaster said, well, his name's Bob Chapman. And my daughter said, that's my father. And so that opened an amazing door. And now they are trying to bring from K to 12, the skills that they've seen in Barry Wehmiller. So we start preparing young people for lives where they can genuinely care, not just with what's the capital of Idaho and the chemicals in water and the history of Congress, okay, but giving them human skills along with intellectual skills. Because the purpose of education originally was to have an informed citizenry so we could have a democracy. But then the Industrial Revolution come along and we needed engineers and scientists and marketing people and lawyers. So our universities became factories for skills. They got raw material, which is the best students they could possibly get. They processed them through the university and they sold them to the market for the highest price they could. And the more they got, the more demand, the better they did. So we have not, our education system feels it needs to give the economy what they want, not what they need, but what they want. So to me, I'm now intensely focused with Harvard, with St. Louis University, with Washington University, with Charlotte Latin School, and there's like St. Norbert's, and Thursday morning, first thing I'm going to talk to the worldwide Jesuit graduate education program, where the Pope has decided we need to do something about the lack of leadership in the world. So anyway, the point I want you to make is we're treating cancer. We're trying to help people care for the people they have the privilege of leading. But the cure for cancer is to put us out of business, to teach young people the skills of listening and caring. So we educate the whole child, not just the mind, but the connection between the mind and the heart, so they can live lives of meaning and purpose. But we have the anger so I'll leave you with this. This point is a powerful one. Right probably now 2 months ago, maybe 10 weeks ago, Bill Urey of Harvard called me concerned about the state of our country, as all of you are. And Bill and I talked for a little bit. I said, Bill, the problem is we don't know how to listen to each other. We're talking to each other, but we're not able to listen to each other. So we don't understand there's different views, there's different feelings. And so we're seeing the conflict. And so Bill and I talked for an hour. And the next morning, he sends me an article from Tom Friedman of the New York Times. And this is really powerful. Tom Friedman wrote an article the next day. He said, "We don't have a poverty of money in this country. We have a poverty of dignity in this country." He said, and when people don't feel dignity, they feel humiliated. When they feel humiliated, you will see anger like you never saw before. And he quotes Nelson Mandela, who talks about the same thing that he experienced in South Africa, the poverty of dignity. When people don't feel valued, when they don't feel heard, when they don't feel cared for, they feel not valued and they feel humiliated. What we're experiencing, according to Tom Friedman's article, which I completely agree with, is the poverty of dignity. Okay. Money does not create dignity. Okay. It's how we treat people. And he goes on to say, which it talks about, again, what Amy talked about, our community listens. He says, what we need in this country is deep listening. He used the word deep. We use empathetic listening, where we learn to listen to each other and open our minds and our hearts to other lenses, looking at the same facts, but seeing things differently, and not dividing countries to start to come together. Because what our country is doing is this: every day, the media on either side is just amplifying our differences, and we don't understand why everybody doesn't see the same thing the same way. What we need to do is we need to learn to listen to each other and understand our differences. So I think Tom Friedman really amplified. So we use that quote all the time. In our country, the pain you're seeing that our kids, our families, our communities are living with is the poverty of dignity. When people feel used for somebody else's gain, they don't feel a sense of meaning and purpose, and they go home and they treat their spouse, they treat their kids, and they behave in their community because they don't feel valued. Okay, they have good salary, they have good benefits, they drive a nice car, and they live in a nice home. They're probably members of the Roaring Fork Club. Okay, but they don't feel dignity, and that's when you feel listened to, you feel validated and understood, and you feel a sense of dignity. So I think Tom Friedman summarized it perfectly.
Well, I have quite a few more questions, and I am so thankful I could listen to your inspiring message for hours, but I want to, give a chance to some of our other folks online to be able to ask some questions or share any other thoughts they'd like to, um, before I ask more of my questions.
Yes, sir. David.
Bob, thanks so much. There's a group of us here that are actually in Tampa right now, so we're right down the road.
Yeah, right down the road. Yeah, I'm on Clearwater Beach.
Oh, that's great. So I think towards the end of your book, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, so excuse me if I get this wrong. You say you don't really try to convert anyone, or the company doesn't try to force anyone to adhere to the ideology. And you're very welcoming of those people as well. I'd like to hear just the thoughts around that.
Simon's advice to us when we decided to start this outreach initiative called Chapman and Co. Leadership Institute, where we got and help companies. Our largest client's American Airlines. Doug Parker, chairman of American Airlines, heard me speak, and he said it changed his life. And he invited us in. And prior to the 737 MAX crisis, we were massively down in Houston, in Dallas, Houston, every day, teaching pilots and terminal supervisors how to care for people. But the advice Simon gave us is called the law of early adoption. I don't have time to try and change somebody who doesn't believe what we believe. Okay. So our goal is to start with, in the law of early adoption, we got to show this is not Barry Wehmiller and Bob Chapman. We need to get other people to adopt this, to show these are universal truths. They're not unique to Bob Chapman and Barry Wehmiller and packaging machinery. And so our statement is we look for people who believe what we believe and want to join us in this journey to show that you can care for people and create economic value. You don't have to use people for economic gain. You can value the people. So it's called the law of early adoption. Bill Urey, who's incredibly close to us now, he said, and I think the word is called, we have courageous patience. Courageous patience. Every one of us on this call has had a different journey through life and different experiences. And you're all not going to respond to the same stimulus in the same way. So Bill Urey describes our leadership model like a bus on a circuit. The bus pulls up to a team member and say, we're going to open the door to truly human leadership. We're going to put our hand and say, Scott or Emily, would you like to join us? Okay. And you say, and Scott or Emily would say, I hear you, but I'm just not ready to get on the bus yet. And we say, that's okay. We'll be back. And the bus goes around the circuit and pulls up again this time. And the door woman said, David, are you ready to join us? And you say, not yet. And it's called courageous patience. We accept that everybody is at a different place, just like our kids in school are in a different place in learning. And that we want people to step in, not be pulled into our culture. And when the Harvard people were visiting our operation, they met a gentleman who was a Navy SEAL, Randall Fleming, tough guy. I mean, he's the kind of guy who saw an alley you duck because he is built like a battleship. And he was one of the guys that everybody said, stay away from. Well, he has become a professor at our university teaching people to care. He went from one extreme to the other. Now, that's an example. Harvard wanted to write a book on him because his story was so extreme. The other way people ask your question, David, is what do you do about the people who don't get it? I get that every time I give a speech because we tend to focus not on the people that do get it, we tend to focus on the people that don't. And what I say is, I am sure there's some people that don't get it. I just don't know who they are. So we spend all of our time, David, catching the people who do get it and holding it up and saying thank you. We have an award called the Guiding Principle Leadership Award, where people nominate their peer, a peer or two, who they believe embodies our leadership principles. And then we have a committee of team members who pick the winner, and then we give them a car to drive for a week. And so we have this big ceremony outside our plants around the country, and we read the qualities of the winner, okay? And we say, okay, this quality. Mary, would you come forward and receive the award? Mary's overwhelmed. She starts crying. 400 people. She starts walking up to the little stage and the shiny cars there that she gets to drive. As Mary walks up, her husband, her two kids, the rector of her church, and her brother-in-law walk out from behind the stage to see Mary, and they're crying. And everybody else feels the emotion. And it's a profound ceremony where we recognize people for their goodness. The beauty, which we didn't realize when we started this, people spend their time not, in a plan of 400, we'll get 100 to 120 nominations for their goodness. And for everybody that's nominated, we write a letter to their home that says, your husband, your wife, your son or daughter was just nominated for their leadership qualities, and we just want to share how proud we are of them. And that has almost as much benefit. And so I've interviewed 500 of these winners around the country, okay? And they tell me three things. It's the most significant achievement of their life. The first thing they do is call their spouse to tell them they won. And 90% of them say they take their mother for a ride in the car. So I got behind each statement. Why is it the most significant recognition of their life? Because it's from their peers who they work side by side every day. They had no idea they felt, and they were so touched by the people that knew them well that they would say those things. Number two, they called their spouse to tell them they won. That's the words they use, but what they mean is when they call, you are unbelievably lucky to be married to me because I just got picked out of 400 people as an outstanding leader. And I took my mother for a ride, okay? Men, grown men, young men, women, 90% of people say I took my, maybe one or two people said they took their dad for a ride, but 90% say they take their mother. And I got behind that and I said, why? Because in general, in our society, not in every home is different, but in general, based on this comment, we tend to think of our fathers as our source of achievement and our mothers as our source of goodness. It's not always true. Certainly can be the opposite. And so what people do is they drive the car up to the mom's house. Mom comes out and says, why do you have that car? You don't even have to say I won. You just drive up in this shiny red convertible and your mom comes out and You get to show your source of goodness that you turned out okay without even saying it, because she asked all the questions. So I gave this talk in Baltimore one day as I was giving an award to some young person in our, and a lady who ran our IT department named Ruth came up to me afterwards. She said, Mr. Chapman, I just heard your 3 things people tell you. And she said, I agree with it completely. I took my daughter to the Virginia foothills. We drove around. At least 20 people that week asked me, why do you have that car? And what kind of car is it? And I got to say, it's an award I get for leadership in my company. And everybody would tell me, the toll booth operator at the toll road, the director of our church, the coach of my son's soccer team. I wish I worked for a company that did that. Okay. And then she said, but unfortunately, my mother died 2 years ago. But I want you to know, I took the car to the cemetery to show my mom, because that's how deeply we want our mothers to know that we turned out okay, even when they're not with us anymore. And so we've really tapped into a profound sense. And the good news is, when we recognize Mary in accounting, all 400 people feel good because they nominated and they know she deserved it. So, well, in our society, we are inundated with the brokenness every day by turning on the TV. In our company, we're inundated with the goodness of the world every day because we have the Guiding Principle Leadership Award, we have the High Five Award, we have the E3 Award. We have a number of ways that we teach. One of the biggest classes we teach is recognition and celebration. How do you let people know in your care that they matter? And we teach people how to recognize people, not just in big awards, every day. It's a key leadership skill, because we know in raising kids, if you don't compliment them 5 times more than you suggest that something they could do better, it's harder. So we took our parenting skills, we applied them to the company. So we spend more time on the goodness in people than the brokenness. Does that make sense? Another question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks. And remember, we operate all over the world. This is a global issue. It is not an American issue. We don't teach leaders how to care. We teach leaders how to use people for financial success. And that's why we see the humiliation and the anger in our country. Not because of a political system. The political system just amplifies it. Foundation is, when we have people in our care for 40 hours a week, if we send them home feeling good about each other, we would dramatically improve the culture and reduce the amount of anxiety and depression in this country. It is at a rampant level, and universities say young students coming into American university today have an epidemic of anguish. We have the highest level of anxiety and depression ever in young students entering colleges today. Other questions? You can't all believe this stuff I've been saying, right? Yes. You got to turn your mic, you got to turn your speaker on, Chris. He's an insurance guy. He doesn't know technology.
All right. So, Bob, I just for fun, and a lot of people may or may not know, but Bob's been very good to me for my whole lifetime. But I had the most unique experience this past week. I work at HM Risk in St. Louis, and they sold the company to another insurance brokerage company. And I happened to have a conversation with the number 2 executive there. And he was going to make an example for me of how they articulate and differentiate themselves in the marketplace. And he said, well, should I put a company name on this? And I said, yeah, put Barry Waymiller's name on that. He said, you could have heard a pin drop. He said, Barry Waymiller, they have been my inspiration and the inspiration for what I do at this company for years. I'm going to be really intrigued to share what my true observation is when I get to know these guys better. You could not believe how excited he was to hear that we had a relationship with your company and what it's meant to them. It's going to be really fun. I can't wait.
Well, Chris, I'll add to that. At Christmas, I got an email from a Russian CEO in Moscow who has 2,000 employees in Moscow. And he was standing in front of a machine that we had built for them in Wisconsin and shipped it to Moscow. It makes corrugated box board. Big $6 million machine. And he sent me a picture standing in front of the machine, holding my book, Everybody Matters. Okay. And he told me that when the pandemic hit them in Moscow, after reading my book, he didn't let people go in his company in Moscow. Okay. Okay. I want to tell you another, I think this will really touch you. We were buying a company in France. In France, the Workers' Council has to agree for you to buy their company. So even though we were buying it from another prominent French company, the Workers' Council, or what we call unions, but they call them Workers' Councils, has to vote to agree to have the sale. So we had an agreement to buy from this prominent French company. I fly over to Quimper, France. It's kind of like the Nantucket of France. Go to the seaside village where this plant is. I sit across from the Workers' Council. And they said, well, Mr. Chapman, we went up to Paris to visit your plant in Paris. We talked to the workers' councils, we talked to the team members, and we studied your culture. And we want you to buy our company. I felt incredible sense of pride as an American that a French company that's known for kind of anti-business attitudes wanted us to buy their company. And I said, well, that means a lot to me. And I really felt a sense of pride. And then a gentleman sitting next to the workers' council's chairman, again, I'm sitting in this coastal village, beautiful part of France. I had all these concerns about the French government and the attitudes. And this gentleman named Philippe sitting next to the chairman said, Mr. Chapman, can I say something? And I said, sure. And he said, Mr. Chapman, we've been waiting for you for 32 years. And these men and women began crying because even in France, where the government protects workers from their management manipulation, people don't feel cared for. Okay, they may have their pensions protected, you may not be able to fire them, but when I saw these grown men and women cry that this American company that cares about people bought them, I just saw the answer to world peace, which is what Bill Urey said. In India, in Italy, in Germany, in Serbia. I landed in Belgrade, Serbia last February to give a speech in Belgrade to a new company we bought. And a van pulls out outside the FBO where we landed our jet. And we walk out of this FBO and I'm with my granddaughter who, graduated from Aston High School and some other team members. I took her along to see this. The van had on the side, this complete side of the van was painted Truly Human Leadership. Bob Chapman had a picture 4 times my size on the side of this van in Belgrade to take us, and they chose us as the acquiring company because of our culture. So I would say to you, honestly, my hope is that I can instill and share this with groups like this around the world, and we all understand that until we learn to care for each other, we are not going to have the world we all know that we need to have with people. We want to bring children in who can have a life of meaning and purpose. And the key to caring is to listen, not talk. Does that make sense? That's the main message I'd give you. The biggest thing I've learned is the greatest skill of caring is to listen with the skills of empathetic listening. Amy took the class. She understands what I mean. But the number of people in Aspen, like 1,200 people in Aspen have taken this class. And I've stood at our lodge at these graduating ceremonies, and people said, I met the most wonderful people in this class. Why? Because they got to know it, they got to see each other beyond their age, the color of their hair, their income status, the color of their skin. They got to see the inner beauty of people by listening to each other. Amy, any other questions I can answer?
I have a quick question. This is Emily over here.
Okay.
Going back to Dave's question, I'm just curious how it translates into hiring. Is this something that you look for in candidates or something you instill and teach over time?
The answer is no. We do not screen for caring. I would say to you that I believe, kind of a little bit like Ronald Reagan said, I believe in the goodness of people. I think there's goodness in everybody. We just need to find it. And I have seen, and we've been doing this 15 years, so this is not a short-term experiment. And again, I told you, Simon Sinek, Bill Urey, Amy Cuddy, Raj Sisodio, Sri Kumara, all the McKinsey people, everybody said they have never seen anything like this. So I know we have been blessed with something. but I have seen businesses transform. Remember, we're the combination of 115 acquisitions around the world. This is not one family born, and just grow. And it's a universal truth. And so we don't screen for that. Okay, we screen for skills, and we believe we can change people. Now, if somebody came and yelled at us, we probably wouldn't hire them. But I mean, I have seen people transform before my eyes. And so I believe in the goodness of people, and I believe there's goodness in everybody, and we have courageous patience to find it. And so we don't screen for these qualities, okay? We screen, but I will tell you, 80% of the people we hire say our culture is the main reason that they want to join our company. Finding talent is not an issue when you have a culture like this. The company in Serbia, they had 4 bids higher than our bid and picked us because of our culture. Our new CFO came from General Electric, picked us because of our culture. We just hired a new guy in our packaging division from Detroit, and he said, I feel a calling to be a part of this. It's almost a calling to be a part of our company. And the pride our people feel in being respected and feeling cared for is beyond your imagination, because it just doesn't exist. You might have a nice boss. Remember, the language of business is boss, supervisors, and managers. I took management classes, got a management degree, and got a job in management. So what did I try and do? I tried to manage people, right? That's a manager. Name anybody in your life you can manage. Name anybody in your life that wants to be managed. Why do we teach people how to be managers instead of leaders, coaches, and mentors? Okay. Why do we do you really want a supervisor? Do you want to have your job and have a supervisor or a boss? We have the most and we fire people. You know where that came from? The French firing squad. The language of business is atrocious, and it leads to atrocious behavior, which describes the manipulation of people for the organizational success. So we find good people everywhere in the world who want to be a part of this movement. So the journey from management to leadership is listening, recognizing, celebration, and serving others. That's the journey.
Well, on that note, I want to say thank you, Mr. Bob Chapman, for joining us this evening. But more importantly, thank you for your message. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you, like you said, for our community listens that I have been able to attend. And thank you for the light you're bringing and the message you're sharing. And I will share this link with everyone on tonight. And if anyone else, please feel free to share the link. And we can do our part in sharing the message as well.
Well, Amy, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to stand on every hill I can, share with everybody I can this blessing I've been given that I think could profoundly change the world. And instead of listening to politicians, we ought to listen to each other, and we ought to begin to care for each other, because why would you want to bring kids into the world as we see it dividing today with the hatred and the bitterness and the lack of dignity? So again, we can address the poverty of dignity tomorrow by simply learning to listen to each other and value each other. And we can have the world that we are intended to have, where people thoroughly enjoy and have a chance for a life of meaning and purpose and live in harmony with each other. And so it's really up to us. We don't need to worry. You don't need to turn on Fox News or CNN or anybody else. You can just say, look at it. And let me leave you with one short story how this applies to every one of you. I gave a speech at the Nairobi University in Amsterdam at the invitation of some McKinsey partners. 2 of the partners who hosted me, one had to leave to go to Manchester after my speech at the university, and the other hosted me at the McKinsey office in Amsterdam. So I give my speech, the one partner leaves, the other partner, and I'm sitting in a circle in their offices. About an hour later, we had lunch and we're starting to talk. And the other partner who had left came in and sat down. I said, McKelly, I thought you were going to Manchester. He said, well, I got to tell you a story. As you know, I heard your speech this morning, but I had to leave to go to Manchester to a client. And I got in a cab with a relatively young cab driver, and he got disoriented and he made some wrong turns. We got stuck in a traffic jam, and it was clear I was going to miss my flight. Irritated as hell. Couldn't believe this cab driver was so incompetent. He said, I just said, take me back to the office. And as I got to the office, as I got out of the cab, very frustrated with the cab driver, all of a sudden I remember your talk that everybody's somebody's precious child. And instead of seeing this young man as a cab driver who had messed up, I saw him as somebody's son who had made a mistake. And I talked to him like I'd like somebody to talk to my son. That is how every one of us could live this every day with the person at the checkout in the grocery store, the person at the gas station. If we learn to care for people through listening, we could profoundly begin to change the world every day with small acts of generosity where we simply listen and care to people and not see people as a function, but see them as somebody's precious child. Even Dick is somebody's precious child, okay? As much of a character he is, he's still somebody's precious child. Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope this message resonates with your heart and gives you some sense of hope, because it's really up to us, not the politicians, not the general manager of the club. It's up to us in the way we carry out our life every day to listen and care for people that we interact with every day. So thank you for this opportunity. I enjoyed it. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you so much.